Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial. And the date is the 21st of June. Wow, the time goes fast. I'm going to talk to you today about unglaciated areas. We talk about glaciated areas all the time. Continental glaciers. They're typical in that they sometimes could be up to a mile high. They could bring rock and rubble called glacial till down to the lower states from Canada. They leave the landscape kind of plowed, so it's relatively flat, and has these glacial erratics every once in a while. If you're in Wisconsin, they can drop out if they're house-sized glacial erratics. By the time they get here, they get to be smaller, but a 3-foot diameter glacial erratic can cost you $200. They're kind of a rarity. People like to have them out in their front yard. On top of a glacial material, which has become soil, partially because of the grinding of the material, but partially because plants come back in, and the glaciated areas are in the northwest corner of the state, Joe Davies County, in Illinois, and into Wisconsin. They happen to be fingers of land that have somehow avoided being glaciated. From a plant point of view, they're refugia. That means plants have been able to refuge there for years. They're also been modified some because the glaciers would have moraines, and they would have areas where the lakes would accumulate, being pounded, and then all of a sudden they would break loose, and that would erode the water would scour the landscape. So you have these interesting situations where you have a softer material under a hard material, the softer material being perhaps slates and shales and limestones or sandstones. On top of it, a dolomite that might be very hard. So if you go to certain places in Wisconsin, you can see mesas, very much like the mesas you get out in the southwest, where there are canyons, and sometimes the mesa's hat will reach out over the canyon. And there are nooks and crannies where creatures can survive. I'm going to alter my cock. It doesn't seem to be working. Got it. Okay. The underground rocks in the area of northwestern Illinois and southwestern Wisconsin are 500 million years old. They're very old. And if you go there, there's these nice rolling hills, except for the meltwaves that I was just describing. There are nice rolling hills, sometimes quite high, nicely rounded, water-worn. I've been there for a long, long time. They have happened to have a lot of minerals, lead and zinc and copper, and that's characteristic. Some of this was right on the top of the ground. Let's go back now and look at some of the history. Early settlement in Wisconsin was probably in the early 1600s. Early exploration to find Illinois and the Mississippi rivers, probably late 1600. Early ownership was by the Indians. They would hunt this area. It was basically a few islands of rather scraggy trees, but mainly prairie. As you get more towards Galena, you get more forest, but it led to the settlement of some of the early communities in Wisconsin, and one was called Mineral Point. And the Indians pointed out that there was lead, but they didn't have much use for lead. But the English people that came in certainly did have a use for lead, and that encouraged one of the first settlements, which also became a prime place for the early attorneys, early governmental officials, early governors. It's a fairly small community, nestled in a valley with these hills around. And so early on, this was French people doing the arriving and doing the exploration, either from the Great Lakes or from the south, New Orleans and up the Mississippi. The French were mainly in the south, and so this was sort of a remote territory. And after they had a war with the Englishmen, they assigned this territory to the English. The native populations were asked to make treaties, and they were moved to the west. After a while, they get to be pretty upset about being moved, and they came back into the eastern side of the Mississippi, and this was a Blackhawk War, and the colonial people were quite afraid. They vacated their houses. They created forts and were very, very cautious. If someone went out and encountered a grove of trees, even though not very big, they might be vulnerable to Indians hiding there. So there were loss of life, and then there were military people, often from the locals, and also from the state, which was at that time Michigan territory, and it covered a huge area. I think some of Iowa, some of Wisconsin, Illinois, and that was gradually being divvied up. The trees were used to fire lead rock, and since trees were so rare, they were either had to be brought in or cared for. When they put up forts, they had to take some of the wood that was reserved for smelting. A guy named Dodge and a few others became leaders in the Blackhawk War. Lincoln was also involved, and the Indian return was quashed with some rather devastating effect, and they retreated to the west. Their agreements were nullified, and they were allowed to come and help work with the mines. The mines were on the surface to a large extent, so miners called badgers were able to harvest from the surface. Gradually that sort of lead was worked out, and you followed veins in, and the veins disappeared. The people who came were not necessarily miners, but they were afraid to go deep mine. At a later time, people from Cornwall who were mining tin on the southwest corner of England were mined out, and they came to places like Mineral Point, along with Irish who were also having some problems. But the Cornwall miners knew how to deep mine, and they knew how to get down to those old Pleistocene era layers, and they did pretty well. They put up houses. The sandstones were malleable, also limestone. When wet, when green and pulled out from quarries, they could make housing. Could be straightened up and made in blocks. So most of the housing was not wood, but block. It was a pretty friendly land. Mineral Point was initiated as a city in 1827, and people began to arrive. So it was a popular mining place, up to the point where the lead was mined out and zinc was not yet worked on, because zinc compounds were part of the overburden that was moved out, and it wasn't realized that it was valuable. It became valuable, so there was a second peak in mining, which was zinc. Since there were not many trees, some of this material was taken to Galena, where there was coal to provide the heat and the furnace and the smelting of the ore. In order to encourage that, there were early railroad lines built, and there are lots of stories there. But back to the undisturbed, driftless areas which hadn't been drifted onto with glaciers. There used to be a tower. I don't know whether it's still there, but you could climb up this tower and you could see the rolling hills and the canyons. Galena is a town that was accessible by water and could take minerals out. So a rather famous doctor spent a lot of his life walking in these canyons and finding plants existing in little structures that might have as little as a spoonful of soil and they'd grow. But one of the interesting plants he discovered was a primrose. And this primrose is mostly known in Alaska, but somehow, along with the glaciation and the meltwaters, and some of the seed must have reached Illinois. And there in the canyon, you could use binoculars to find these little outliers of a plant that didn't really belong, but it managed to survive in Illinois. There's another aspect to some of this. A little bit further down, when these meltwaters took sand and gravel into the rivers, there were sand dunes, because the winds, when the glaciers retreated, the winds would blow this sandy soil. And so if you go to places like Clinton in Iowa or Savannah, Illinois, way up there in the northwest, you can encounter sand dunes, and they're still active. That means that if you have a blow, the sand will blow out, and the creatures that survive are tough creatures that can resist being maltreated with dune activity. The plants and animals are there in gravel and sand. So although there's a reasonable rainforest, this is an edaphic soil. This is a soil which drains very quickly, and it's more like unto the deserts that you get in Arizona or someplace. So there again, fairly close to the northwest corner of Illinois, are sand dunes that you ought to know about, and it's a place you could go to. I think that might be all I need to say about unglaciated areas, but remember that they are refugia, so that when the major glaciers dry up, then the plants can come back in and express themselves. I'm going to say something more about the plants that we have locally. I took a walk in the detention pond last night, and there were the first bee lumps out in flower, the first yellow coneflowers, and also orange milkweed. So you may want to watch your little prairies, because they're getting into a June peak. Bill Smith called me up, and he has some Joe Pye weed that are mature, and we could use some Joe Pye weed at our Rantoul prairie. They like a little bit of shade, they like moisture, and these are mature plants that could add a little character to the southern part of the Pope Prairie. So we'll collect those and take them north. I wanted to tell you about some more plants that you will begin to see soon and flowering. One of them is Ceanothus, or New Jersey tea, and it's a plant that grows about 2 or 3 feet high, no more, and it doesn't find its way into the herbaceous information books because it is a shrub. It has a very rooty base, very red roots, and they spread out in a 3-foot circle. And this is a plant that we have on the Route 10 corridor at Seymour. It comes up with a white flower, and in September we will have people collect the seed. Anymore, some of the seed companies have been clever enough to identify the requirements of these plants so they can grow their own plants. They don't always grow successfully by themselves, because many of these plants are friends and relatives, and they get off of each other. And some of the plants have microorganisms attached to roots that allow the plant to grow better or to survive in places like sand dunes. But New Jersey tea is a fun plant to encounter, a little bit on the rare side, and you should watch for it. It looks exactly like it was part of the regular 100 prairie plants, or the ones that you have. It does grow well by itself, so it's not totally dependent on other creatures. I thought I would deal with the carrot family. We were listing the composite family last week, and there are many carrots. I think we mentioned them last week a little. We have some invasive carrot family plants. One is a hemlock, which is a poison hemlock, and you have to handle it with care, especially if you're getting rid of it. It has a juice that can give you dermatitis. But there are native hemlocks too. The family is characterized by being looking like an umbrella. You have a range of umbrellas, and then little umbrellas on top of the umbrellas, and so the family name is Umbelliferae. And there are a number of plants. Some of them are a little on the invasive side, a little on the cultivar side. They've come in from farming. One is a parsnip, and wild carrot, but some of them are native. Golden Alexander is a native, and so specialists tend to get rid of the parsnips and the hemlocks in an attempt to get back to a more pure prairie. I have a friend, Ron Slater, who has a nice little prairie in the region of Clinton, Iowa, and he is very near to some of the outwash plain material which is creating the sand dunes that are there on the east side of the Mississippi River. He has little pools of prairie that he is preserving for our natural heritage, and that is his avocation. He is also very helpful and interested in the Pope Prairie, which has some of the same qualities. One of the interests is that there are lands adjacent often where the owners are very much aware that they have something that's unique, and sometimes those areas can be upgraded and increase the offering of what we have to show other generations what we have. We have a situation like that at the Pope Prairie, where we have quite a good regrowth succession prairie coming back in, but a piece of farmland right adjacent where we could use that for education and people to get experience with the planting of a reconstruction prairie, which is very different from a remnant prairie. It is rough and tough and is enough to be available to the public. Part of that farm adjacency has been converted to cemetery real estate, and they have planted a prairie, and that sort of thing is interesting to see. So as I roam around the detention pond, I find penstemons in flower, almost finished blooming. I find people who are interested and asking questions. I find the prairie that we moved from the Park Prairie doing very well, and I find people enjoying the walkways that are there, and the walkways have been sown to a modest prairie. We also have geese. There are lots of geese. I expect that I could count 100 geese. Each couple has up to 8 young ones, and they're grazers. And we provide them with grazing territory, mowing lawns that are nicely fertilized, and we provide them with ponds where they can swim and dabble in the mud for food. It's a very controversial issue. It's tremendously difficult to want to exterminate these animals because they're intelligent, they have their way of communicating, they are indirectly encouraged by people who feed them. They bring bread, and there's a certain attraction to being able to attract 30 or 40 geese to one point. The park districts and forest preserve plead with people not to feed, but it doesn't get very far. So people who don't realize that this is encouraging more and more geese are worried. I have to say that in effect, we're farming geese. It's just like having a turkey farm, except with turkeys you don't have to have a pond to support the geese. So at the moment, there are people who are legitimately protesting the Urbana Park District move to exterminate the geese and sell the meat. It will be healthy meat. This is really good meat, and they won't be interested in exterminating all the geese, because the 100 geese that are in Champaign at the moment are just going to be wise enough to go over to Champaign, to Urbana. So the geese tend to drop droppings which are full of fertilizer too, and they wash into the pond, and the pond gets to have algal growth as a result. The Champaign pond has a aerator and waterfalls, and that helps to prevent stagnation of the ponds. But still, there's a concern about the amount of droppings, and some people with a broom them off to the side, but still it's not easy to walk through the corridor. But still, it's like a zoo. It's an attractive nuisance. The geese don't move into the prairie areas very much, so they remain intact and also interesting. Our prairies are beginning to grow taller. Some are 4 feet high already and doing well. Now, let's go back to one of the families that many people are interested in. It is Asclepias, or milkweeds. So known because if you injure the leaf or the stem, it will bleed milk, a milk-like substance. These milkweeds are growing well in Scott Park, and they're about to bloom. So if you're interested, take a walk around Scott Park and commune with the animals, but also commune with plants. And notice that they have a little rain garden there, and that supports wetland species, and also where the boneyard comes through, it supports wetland species. I might mention here that there are books that you can get that help you explain what you're looking at. The one that is used widely is Tori Peterson, Guide to Wildflowers. There are more technical books that look at the forests of the east as they abut to the west. But these are books that allow you to identify a species and give you some idea as to where they can be found and what their growing conditions are. There's a book by Jefferson Post, which is an exploration of nature in Illinois, and it's a guide to prairie sites that you can go to, like the site that was found by the doctor in the Apple Canyon of the Joe Davies County in northwestern Illinois. One of the plants that will come soon is the atrus. If I should send you to Oak Prairie, I think that would be interesting for you to do. It's nice to go early in the morning when the flowers are fresh. Haven't had to go through a hot day. So let me remind you again that our best place to visit at this time is in Rantoul, north of Rantoul by 1 mile. You go through Rantoul and then curl out around a cemetery, the Maplewood Cemetery, and then go to the next section road. On your right there will be a cell tower. On your left is a section road that goes east and west. Take 100 feet and you'll meet an old Route 45. And you can park on that and find your way around a yellow gate and walk perhaps 400 feet down, or even more than that, perhaps 600 feet down the old road, and then look east and you will see an area that has had 8 feet of glacial till removed, and that is where our prairie regrowth succession is coming back into action. And if you step carefully, you will see purple coneflowers, pale purple coneflowers coming up right now, and the bushy elements of Liatris. They're ready, dotted with compass plants and dock and rosinweed and roses and prairie clovers and baptisias and the eupatorium or Joe Pyeweed we're talking about, plus boneset, and it won't be overly exciting, but it will be interesting for you to encounter your heritage. One of the things we do is we dipsy-doodle. We go to a adjacent interurban and we take, for instance, purple prairie clover. But you have to realize that that prairie clover has on its roots a rhizobian bacteria, which is a symbiotic bacteria that makes use of the carbohydrates and other foods that are provided by the plant, but they in turn give the plant minerals, and when the plant dies, it helps to, the bacteria help to set nitrogen, and so it's a nitrogen fixing bacteria. It takes nitrogen out of the air and fixes it with plant proteinaceous material. If you're going to transplant that plant, it pays to bring some of the soil with you, because it might not have that rhizobian bacteria in the gravel pit prairie. So you can buy rhizobium, but there are several different species. Often the package that you buy from like a Prairie Moon has several species in it, and so that makes sure that you get uh, the prairie plant the native materials that it needs. Purple clover is a legume. We have several legumes. One is lead plant, one is baptisia, or these are plants that also need rhizobia. Some of the grasses also need associations with bacteria and fungi and a wealth of organisms that you find in even just a spoonful of native soil. Some of those soils and their roots are studied. One person, Wesley Jackson's daughter in Iowa, grows little blue stem in a pipe that is goes down 20 feet and is about 12 inches across. That plant, if left to grow for 5 years, produces roots that go down 18 feet. If you wash them off, you can take them to a meeting to show how the reticulation of the rootlets allows that plant to survive. But that plant also has associated organisms and biochemicals that allow it to interact with the soil, and the soil may gradually gather up structure because of this. And that's why we work with native vegetation, because we need to preserve the dignity of the soils we have. We have very few prairie soils left, and if you chemicalize them, then you're not going to be able to get that sort of simulation. But we need those areas as refugia for animals and creatures. They're not refugia in the glaciated sense, but they are a refugia in the sense of being small enclaves which will allow explosion into other places. If you plant Joe Pye weed, in 5 years' time you might have silver Joe Pye weed. If you plant a rattlesnake master and it has the right insect pollinators, it will grow very well. If you don't have the right pollinator, it won't grow. So we're looking after this biodiversity and encouraging you to go see it. So if you go to Rantoul, just 1 mile north of Rantoul, you will see our 9-acre prairie. But if you go west or east, you will notice the rolling nature of that moraine. So you'll see the geology. You go east, you go past a golf course. And it has, part of that golf course is rolling territory. You go past a little piece of farmland that has block drainage, where the block drainage has denied the germination of corn and farmers are planting, replant at this time. Go a little further and you're on top of a landfill. It probably shouldn't be on the top of the landfill because it leaches down, but that's the way it was initiated. And alongside there are contours that allow rolling territory to be worked. Go a little further yet and you have areas that are set aside by hunting groups that have the ability to come hunt pheasants and other creatures. But that preserves the dignity of the land. Go a little further yet to Gifford, you have a short piece of remnant railroad right-of-way owned by the Grand Prairie Friends. If you go further yet to Armstrong, you're going to get into bottomlands that come through from Ford County, where there is swampland that was drained but not drained totally, and it comes through as salt forks of Vermilion and meets the Vermilion and goes into the Wabash and down to the Mississippi. So if you keep going west from our little prairie on Route 45, you get to Penfield and you get to the northeast corner of the county where there is swampland and a place for migrating birds. And we like to think that if we put in a tourist trace from Kankakee to Onaga to Gilman to Buckley to Loda, where there's a nice little prairie cemetery, to Paxton, and utilize an old Route 45 prairie for a prairie trail. You will have an interesting experience, and if we direct you to go east to farmland, to the swampy remnants of the catchment area that starts in Ford County and comes through to the Wabash and Ohio and Mississippi and the Gulf. I got interested in the watershed that gets into Indiana. It was a little bit like the mineral point that we've been talking about. And it's a region, and it was developed from the rivers. So I looked at that because there was a doctor that I was reading about named Evans, and there's an Evansville there, and I wondered about the name, but the name Evans came from a different Evans. But I was looking at that, and it was where there was early canals, and the early canal went north and connected with the Erie Canal, and the canals unfortunately came to their peak just before the railroads came, and the railroads were more efficient than the canals. So the little canal in this watershed, on utilizing part of the Wabash River, were only used 2 or 3 times before railroads came in and obsoleted. We can find some of those canals still very interesting. There's one that goes from Joliet, where the near to Galena, and it goes across to Rock Island and the Quad Cities, and part of that is in the keeping of the state and is reproducible. It had locks every so often. If you wanted to go over a hill, you had to have a source of water that would fill up your container, so you would be lifting your ship up and it would move to the other side of the hill and go down. So there's a canal that provides water for that sort of situation. I think I want to look at the time because I'm not quite sure what time we have. I like to leave a little room for advertising.
You're about at 51 minutes right now, Dave.
Okay, so I've got. Thanks very much.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a few minutes left to encourage you to get out there at the June, July peak and start to look at your plants. If it's pale purple coneflower, you don't even have to go out that far. Just go to the horticultural plot that is adjacent to University Avenue and 2nd Street, and the purple coneflowers. These are commercial purple coneflowers, but they do the same sort of thing. Early on, they bent over, and you think, oh, this plant is not well. But if you wait a little while, that plant will become erect, and their flowers are out at the moment, and they're photographical, and they're in several plots. They're in pollinator plots too, where there are plants that are being planted that, like Coreopsis, that are going to give pollinators some room to provide for bees to pollinate, and we need those pollinators. So take a walk, take your bicycle and ride through the Big Dig and enjoy it. There are people there, not too many people. They're usually keeping their masks on, but you can wave to them, and there's a general understanding. I wish that people wouldn't feed the geese, but that's another problem we'll probably never solve. And I don't think we're going to find a home for those rather interesting animals. They come right up to you, and you have to wonder, because those animals have wings and they have feet, and if you annoy them, they can actually take after you. But especially if you've been feeding them regularly, then you don't feed them. A little bit like squirrels. If you get to do something regularly with them and then you stop, then they can get to be a little mean. So treat the animals with respect. So I think I'll leave the remaining few minutes for information that helps us to maintain this sort of facility, whether it's with WEFT or with the Urbana Free Library or the Urbana Public Television, to try and encourage people to think more about their native biodiversity. I have been tempted to think that we have varying levels of game production in this town. Hundreds of people who are producing games. I would really like to see some games which would include biodiversity. I don't think it's going to happen, because we've got into the syndrome of having to pop off creatures or win, and biodiversity is not necessarily a win-win situation. So I am giving up on that idea, but I wish I could find someone with 20 years of computer savvy who could move into the ecology and create interest and awareness. We need leaders, and we need the leaders to know what they're doing. And one of our great gaps is that we just don't have this sort of information. We have a wonderful natural history survey, and we have wonderful Audubons and Sierra Clubs and Isaac Waltlings and all the rest. But we need more than that, and we need to do it on a world basis, because our ecosystems just don't start and stop in one place. They're all over, as is indicated by the virus. Well, I'm going to say thank you for listening, and this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1.